Welcome to tonight's journey beyond the edge of gravity, when Harmony Station's artificial core failed without warning. One man's instinctive leap saved a princess and triggered an ancient rite that could fracture two civilizations. What began as a scientific conference spiraled into lethal trials, political sabotage, and a choice between tradition and evolution. This is a story of survival under pressure, where love collides with power. Stay with us and step into the orbit where destiny shifts. Gravity collapsed without warning. The reception hall lurched as artificial gravity stuttered, then inverted. Glass flutes exploded mid-air, shards spinning like silver shrapnel. Bodies slammed into the ceiling in a storm of silk, metal, and terrified screams. Adrian Vale felt his boots rip free from the floor as the station's core groaned beneath him. Emergency lights pulsed crimson. Oxygen vents hissed across the chaos. He saw her, Princess Lyra Solene, thrown backward toward a steel column. Skull seconds from impact. Training overrode shock. Adrian kicked off a drifting table, slicing through debris. The air tasted metallic, charged with ozone. He caught her around the waist just as gravity snapped sideways again. They crashed against a reinforced bulkhead, bones rattling. Pain flared along his spine. The floor returned in a brutal slam. Silence followed, broken only by distant alarms and ragged breathing. He was still holding her. Security drones descended in a tight formation, blue field sweeping the fractured hall. Medics rushed past, lifting the injured while engineers fought to stabilize the gravity grid. Adrian helped Lyra to her feet, her silver hair disheveled, violet eyes sharp despite the chaos. Before he could speak, Ambassador Rowan appeared, expression carved from stone. "You saved her," Rowan said quietly. "Do you understand what that means?" Lyra answered instead, voice steady. "He has invoked the Royal Code." Around them, Artemisian officials straightened with ritual precision. Rowan exhaled. "On Artemis, the one who saves royal blood becomes the chosen. Tradition demands a tournament. Refusal is insult. Insult breeds unrest." Adrian felt the weight shift from gravity to politics. This was no gratitude ceremony. It was a survival mechanism disguised as honor. Lyra met his gaze. "You are bound now." The fractured hall had been cleared, but tension lingered heavier than broken glass. Artemisian guards formed a silent perimeter as members of the High Council projected themselves into the chamber, towering in holographic authority. Adrian stood beneath their gaze, palms damp inside his sleeves. Ambassador Rowan leaned close. "Choose carefully. This moment echoes beyond you. Refuse," and Artemis would read it as contempt. "Accept," and warriors would bleed in his name. Lyra's expression betrayed nothing, but her eyes searched his for resolve. The council's lead voice resonated through the chamber. "Earthborn, do you honor the Royal Code?" Adrian felt the station's hum under his boots. The vast orbit of Artemis beyond the hull. Survival here was no longer about oxygen or gravity. It was about consequence. He straightened. "I accept." The chamber sealed the vow with a pulse of light. The arena lights extinguished, plunging thousands into breathless darkness. Then the floor dissolved. A violent surge of heat blasted outward as holographic projectors roared to life. In seconds, polished steel became a living jungle, towering canopies dripping acidic rain, tangled roots splitting the ground, distant predators roaring through synthetic mist. Adrian felt humidity slam into his lungs as oxygen levels fluctuated unpredictably. The contestants materialized at the perimeter. Muscles coiled, eyes locked on the shifting terrain. A horn detonated through the stadium. They ran. Gravity pockets snapped like traps, pulling bodies sideways. One warrior leapt across a chasm as the ground collapsed behind her in a cascade of digital debris that felt terrifyingly real. Lightning cracked overhead. The jungle hunted as fiercely as any rival. From his elevated platform, Adrian understood. This was not ceremony. It was evolutionary proof. Adrian gripped the railing as the jungle turned merciless. Acid rain intensified, sizzling against combat suits. A contestant slipped on a moss-slick branch. The gravity field inverted mid-fall, slamming her into a trunk before stabilizing. She didn't scream. She climbed. Another warrior engaged a simulated predator, six-limbed, blade-mouthed. Moving with algorithmic precision, she lured it toward unstable terrain, triggered a landslip, and buried it beneath cascading debris. Efficiency. No hesitation. Medical drones hovered at the perimeter, ready but rarely needed. This was not reckless brutality. It was cultivated resilience. Adrian felt the brutal logic beneath the spectacle. Artemis had evolved in catastrophe. Superstorms, tectonic upheavals, radiation flares. Weakness once meant extinction. The tournament wasn't about him. It was proof that their species could still endure the worst, and watching them survive. He realized how fragile humanity might look in comparison. Ambassador Rowan stepped beside Adrian as the jungle simulation shifted into night phase. Bioluminescent spores ignited across the canopy, casting ghost light over exhausted contestants still moving through lethal terrain. "Do you see it now?" Rowan asked quietly. Adrian didn't answer. Below, two warriors locked in silent competition, neither willing to yield ground near a dwindling oxygen pocket. Rowan's voice hardened. This right was born during Artemis's collapse era. Civil wars, resource starvation. The strongest bonded to ensure survival. It kept their species unified when extinction was imminent. A simulated tremor ripped through the arena floor, nearly toppling one competitor into a fissure of molten light. Rowan leaned closer. If this ritual fractures publicly, factions will interpret it as weakness. Weakness invites rebellion. Adrian watched Lyra observing from the royal tier. Calm but coiled. Survival here wasn't about predators. It was about stability. The observatory dome retracted with a hydraulic sigh, revealing Artemis suspended beyond the glass like a living ocean. Stars burned cold and indifferent. Adrian stood at the edge of the platform, pulse still echoing from the arena's violence. Lyra approached without ceremony, her footsteps soft against the metal lattice. "You watched them survive," she said. Gaze fixed on the planet below, Adrian nodded. "Your world shaped them that way." Artemis's storms flashed faintly along its horizon, electrical veins threading the clouds. Lyra activated a projection, quantum resonance patterns rippling between planetary nodes. "We learned to communicate through catastrophe," she said. Adrian overlaid his own biomarker detection models beside her display. Two systems, different origins. Same logic, adaptation or extinction. Their hands brushed while adjusting the interface. Neither moved away. Outside the glass, a solar flare shimmered across the darkness. Survival demanded alignment. The resonance projections dimmed, leaving only starlight and the distant glow of Artemis beyond the dome. Silence pressed in, thicker than vacuum. Adrian felt the weight of unspoken choices between them. Tradition, diplomacy, survival. Lyra stepped closer, her presence steady as gravity itself. "If this ritual ends badly," she said softly, "my world fractures." Adrian's throat tightened. "If it continues unchanged, someone bleeds for a symbol." Their breaths mingled in the cool air, recycled through the observatory vents. The station hummed beneath their feet, orbit locked, balance delicate. Lyra reached for him first, fingers brushing his collar as though confirming he was real. The kiss was not hesitant. It was collision. Fear, defiance, hunger, and something dangerously human. Outside, a meteor streaked past the dome in silent fire. Inside, boundaries dissolved. Survival was no longer abstract. It was personal. The kiss faded, but the consequences did not. Lyra rested her forehead against his, breath unsteady yet controlled. "You think this can simply stop," she said quietly. "It cannot." Below them, Artemis rotated, storms flashing like old scars. This rite ended 3 civil wars. It unified clans when famine stripped our oceans dry. If I dismantle it openly, factions will rise. Blood will follow. Adrian pulled back slightly, frustration tightening his jaw. "So we let it continue? Let warriors risk their lives for political symmetry?" Lyra's violet eyes hardened. "Survival is rarely clean." The station lights flickered briefly, a reminder of fragile systems. Adrian felt the truth settle like cold metal in his chest. The tournament was not cruelty, it was control. To change it meant risking collapse. The choice was impossible because both paths demanded sacrifice. The jungle dissolved into white light. When it cleared, the arena had transformed into a circular laboratory suspended over a simulated abyss. Holographic equations spiraled in mid-air, shifting in real time as contestants approached their assigned stations. Neural interfaces descended from the ceiling, thin filaments ready to connect thought to machine. The challenge was announced: stabilize a failing interstellar communication network modeled after Artemis's resonance grid. Adrian leaned forward as Lyra stepped into position, hands steady above the luminous console. Around her, competitors activated problem trees branching into fractal complexity. Energy levels fluctuated. Wrong inputs triggered cascading system failures that rippled across the arena floor like digital shockwaves. Lyra closed her eyes briefly, recalling their discussions in the observatory. Then she moved. Her fingers traced patterns with surgical precision, weaving Artemis logic with subtle Earth-derived optimization. The failing network began to stabilize. A sharp distortion sliced through the lab simulation. The holographic abyss flickered, then surged violently upward as if gravity itself had miscalculated. Consoles sparked. One contestant screamed when her neural filament overloaded, ripping free in a spray of blue static. Adrian felt the shift immediately. This wasn't a programmed escalation. Energy readings spiked beyond safety thresholds. Lyra's console glitched, equations mutating into corrupted code. From the council tier, several Artemisian officials exchanged rigid, unreadable looks. Sabotage. The failing network was no longer theoretical. Feedback pulses began to bleed into the station's real communication grid. Warning glyphs flashed crimson along the arena perimeter. If the cascade wasn't halted, it could destabilize orbital relays beyond the simulation chamber. Lyra clenched her jaw and recalibrated, refusing to disengage. Survival had shifted again. Now the threat wasn't tradition, it was someone trying to weaponize it. The lab simulation stabilized just enough to prevent full collapse, but the damage was clear. Someone inside the High Council wanted chaos. Lyra withdrew from her station, eyes blazing with controlled fury. Later, in a maintenance corridor far from surveillance tiers, she faced Adrian beneath the hum of coolant lines. "This is no longer ceremony," she said. "They will escalate." Adrian felt the implications settle like vacuum. If sabotage continued during the final trial, casualties would be real. Lyra's voice lowered. "There is one way to contain it." He understood before she finished. "You enter the tournament." She nodded once. As heir, her participation would redirect authority, forcing factions into the open. It would also make her the primary target. Adrian exhaled slowly. This plan wasn't rebellion. It was exposure. If she stepped into the arena, she would be fighting enemies far beyond the simulation walls. The High Council chamber erupted the moment Lyra's formal entry was transmitted across the station. Holographic projections flared to life, towering figures arguing in layered dialects that vibrated through the floor. Some called it sacrilege, a contamination of sacred hierarchy. Others saw calculated evolution. Energy shields shimmered between factions as security protocols activated, preventing physical escalation. Ambassador Rowan stood rigid at the perimeter, monitoring diplomatic channels spiking with alarm from Earth. Adrian watched from the gallery above, pulse hammering. Lyra stood alone in the center, posture unshaken despite the storm around her. "The code demands strength," she declared evenly. "I will demonstrate it." The chamber lighting dimmed as power fluctuations rippled outward from stressed grid systems. This was no longer private defiance. The stability of Artemis balanced on a procedural loophole and a woman willing to risk civil fracture. The arena doors parted with a hydraulic roar, and Lyra stepped through in full combat regalia, silver armor reflecting the harsh floodlights. The crowd fell into stunned silence. Warriors who had trained for this moment froze mid-stride, eyes narrowing as they registered her presence among them. High above, banners bearing royal sigils flickered uncertainly as the station's systems recalibrated to her biometric signature. Adrian felt every gaze shift. Measuring, recalculating. This was no symbolic gesture. She had entered as an equal contender. A ceremonial drone scanned her wrist, confirming eligibility under the code's oldest clause. Murmurs rippled outward like shock waves through water. Some cheered, others hissed in outrage. Lyra did not acknowledge either. She took her position at the starting line, muscles coiled, jaw set. The horn began its low countdown. Tradition had just acquired a heartbeat. From the VIP platform, Adrian couldn't breathe. The arena lights sharpened every contour of Lyra's armor, every tightening muscle in her stance. Around her stood warriors who had survived acid storms and tectonic ruptures on Artemis itself. Now she would stand against them. If she lost, factions would claim weakness in the royal line. If she won, those same factions might call it manipulation. Either outcome threatened fracture. The horn sounded. The ground split open into a shifting field of kinetic platforms suspended over a simulated abyss. Lyra moved instantly, precision over brute force, conserving energy while others lunged recklessly for advantage. Adrian gripped the railing until his knuckles blanched. He had studied extinction events his entire career. This felt the same. Civilizations balanced on single variables. Only now the variable was the woman he loved. Fighting in a storm he helped create. The arena fractured into shifting geometry as the final trial initiated. Platforms dissolved into luminous corridors, twisting through multi-dimensional space. Data streams hung like molten rivers, between crystalline pillars, pulsing with unstable energy. This was no simple puzzle. It was a living hybrid construct, fusing Artemis resonance networks with Earth's algorithmic architecture. Contestants stepped into separate nodes, each path recalculating in real time based on decisions made seconds earlier. A misstep caused corridors to collapse into void, forcing rapid recalibration. Adrian recognized fragments of his own biomarker optimization code embedded within the maze's logic. Someone had integrated both civilizations into this final design. Energy output spiked dangerously high, pushing the station's core toward overload thresholds. Lyra advanced cautiously, reading harmonic shifts in the structure, adjusting with fluid precision. The maze did not reward strength. It demanded synthesis, or it would consume the unwary whole. Warning sirens cut through the arena as power conduits beneath the maze began to overload. The hybrid construct wasn't isolated. It drew directly from Harmony Station's central reactor to sustain its shifting dimensions. Energy levels climbed past safe margins, red glyphs flashing across the upper tiers. Adrian felt the floor vibrate under his boots, a low tremor spreading through structural beams. If the maze destabilized completely, the feedback surge could rupture the orbital stabilizers. Contestants hesitated as gravity vectors flickered unpredictably, corridors bending into unstable spirals. One warrior miscalculated a step and vanished into a collapsing node before emergency fields caught her mid-fall. Lyra steadied herself, recalculating resonance patterns against rising interference. Sweat beaded along her temple beneath the combat visor. This trial was no longer symbolic. The reactor's hum deepened into a threatening roar. Failure, would not end in ceremony. It would end in vacuum. A violent energy surge rippled through the maze, fracturing the corridor ahead of Lyra into splintered light. The harmonic pathways she had mapped seconds earlier dissolved into chaotic interference. For the first time since entering the arena, she hesitated, a fractional delay, barely perceptible, but enough. The competing warrior in the adjacent node surged ahead, locking into a stable resonance sequence. The reactor's roar intensified, vibrations crawling through the stands. Adrian saw the shift in Lyra's posture, the tightening of her shoulders as doubt flickered behind her visor. Gravity inverted sharply, slamming her sideways against a crystalline pillar. The impact cracked her forearm guard. Energy arcs snapped inches from her faceplate. The maze recalculated without mercy. Another surge like this, and containment fields would fail entirely. Lyra pushed upright, breath ragged. The margin for error had vanished out. One miscalculation now meant catastrophic collapse. Adrian stopped thinking and started calculating. Reactor output scrolled across the upper display, 93%, and climbing. The maze's hybrid logic was looping, Artemis resonance clashing with Earth algorithms without a stabilizing bridge. Lyra staggered inside the collapsing node, seconds from another destabilizing surge. Ambassador Rowan's voice barked something about protocol, but Adrian was already at the auxiliary console. He jacked his wrist pad into an unsecured maintenance port. Bypassing diplomatic firewalls, security glyphs flashed amber, then red. He uploaded a compressed adaptive pattern, an Earth biomarker algorithm rewritten to translate resonance fluctuations into predictive corrections. If the Council detected foreign interference, Earth's delegation would be expelled, or worse. He hesitated for one heartbeat, then executed the injection. Data cascaded into the maze's core architecture. Somewhere inside that storm of light, Lyra would feel the shift. Inside the collapsing corridor, Lyra felt the maze hesitate. The violent oscillations in the resonance field smoothed into a recognizable rhythm. Foreign, but precise. Patterns began surfacing beneath the chaos, predictive pulses aligning seconds before structural shifts occurred. Adrian's algorithm. She didn't question it. She recalibrated instantly, overlaying Artemis harmonic logic atop the incoming Earth sequence. The two systems collided, then synchronized, forming a stable feedback loop. Platforms that had been disintegrating reassembled into viable pathways. The rival contestant lunged toward what looked like advantage, only to find her corridor dissolving under outdated resonance logic. Lyra moved with renewed clarity, every step calculated through the hybrid pattern, now flowing through the maze. The reactor's roar steadied by degrees, for the first time since instability began. The construct felt solvable. Survival no longer depended on dominance. It depended on integration. Lyra reached the maze's core nexus, a rotating lattice of light suspended over raw reactor energy. The hybrid algorithm pulsed through her interface, translating resonance spikes into coherent vectors. She extended both hands toward the control array, fingers weaving Earth's predictive sequence into Artemis's harmonic command structure. The lattice shuddered violently, then resisted, trying to revert to pure dominance logic. Lyra forced the integration deeper, synchronizing the two systems at their root frequency. A final surge blasted outward, nearly throwing her from the platform. Adrian watched power levels spike to critical red, then plateau. The reactor's roar softened into a steady hum. Corridor fractures sealed, gravity normalized. Across the arena, emergency glyphs dimmed from crimson to blue. The maze stabilized completely. Lyra stood alone at its center, armor cracked, breath shaking, but victorious. The arena remained silent for a suspended breath, as if the entire station needed confirmation that collapse had truly been avoided. Then the central dais ignited with ceremonial light. The High Council's lead adjudicator materialized above the stabilized nexus, voice amplified through every tier of the structure. "By strength demonstrated and mind proven," she intoned, "the victor of the Royal Code trial is Lyra Solene of Artemis." The words reverberated through steel and bone alike. Some sections of the crowd erupted in cheers, others remained rigid. Calculating consequences, Lyra stepped forward from the fading lattice, armor scorched, visor lifted, eyes clear despite exhaustion. Drones descended to record biometric confirmation, sealing the outcome into the station's archives. Adrian felt the declaration settle, like gravity restored. The code had been fulfilled. Now came the part tradition had not anticipated: choice. Protocol required Lyra to approach the ceremonial dais and receive the binding seal of selection. Instead, she turned away from the adjudicator and walked straight toward the VIP platform. A ripple of shock moved through the arena like a pressure wave. Security drones shifted position, uncertain whether to intervene. Adrian barely registered the movement before she reached him, without hesitation. Lyra pulled him down into a fierce, unguarded kiss beneath the floodlights. Gasps erupted from every tier. The High Council's holograms flickered in agitation. This was not defiance of victory. It was defiance of control. When she broke the kiss, Lyra faced the assembly, breath steady despite the storm rising around her. "The code demands strength," she said clearly. "I have shown it. Now I choose." The silence that followed was heavier than any gravity field. Lyra released Adrian's hand only long enough to step forward, placing herself between him and the council projections. "For generations," she said, voice carrying without amplification. "This right ensured our survival through dominance. It forged unity in catastrophe. But survival evolves." Murmurs swelled across the tiers. She gestured toward the stabilized nexus behind her. "Today, the trial nearly destroyed us because it rejected synthesis. Strength alone fractured the system. Integration saved it." Her gaze swept the chamber, unflinching. "I claim Adrian Vale not as prize, nor symbol of submission, but as partner, chosen freely, not assigned by ritual." Ambassador Rowan felt every diplomatic channel spike. Yet no alarms sounded. The arena did not erupt into violence. Instead, hesitation lingered. Then scattered applause rose. Cautious but undeniable. The code had been fulfilled. Its meaning had just shifted. The arena emptied slowly, but tension thickened across Harmony Station. Council chambers remained active long after the lights dimmed, holographic factions arguing behind sealed energy fields. Some elders called Lyra's declaration a necessary evolution. Others labeled it contamination by foreign influence. Diplomatic channels between Artemis and Earth pulsed with encrypted exchanges. Ambassador Rowan worked without pause, countering accusations that Adrian had manipulated sacred systems. In orbit, defense platforms recalibrated as precaution, their cannons tracking nothing and everything at once. Adrian watched from a private viewport as Artemis rotated below, storms flashing across its oceans like restrained fury. He understood now. Victory had not ended the trial. It had moved it outward, into politics and perception. Survival was no longer confined to the arena. It was embedded in every decision the council would make next. Ambassador Rowan stood alone in the diplomatic chamber, watching live projections of Artemisian debates ripple across layered feeds. He had expected outrage, sanctions, perhaps even expulsion. Instead, he saw hesitation. Younger council members replayed footage of the reactor stabilization, isolating the moment where integration prevented collapse. Data analysts across both worlds began modeling hybrid systems inspired by the trial. Rowan exhaled slowly. This had not been reckless rebellion. It had been a demonstration under pressure. Proof that cooperation outperformed isolation when survival was at stake. Still, backlash simmered. Hardline factions accused Earth of covert interference. Rowan reviewed the logs and saw Adrian's unauthorized algorithm injection. Technically indefensible. Strategically brilliant. He realized something uncomfortable. History rarely shifts through permission. It shifts through calculated risk. The arena had nearly destroyed them. Integration had saved them. That narrative was already spreading, alone in her private quarters. Lyra removed her cracked armor piece by piece, each dent a reminder of what had almost been lost. Outside the viewport, Artemis glowed serene, disguising the unrest beneath its oceans. The council had not stripped her title, but restrictions tightened around her authority. Surveillance increased. Allies revealed themselves cautiously. Opponents withdrew into silence. Adrian stood across the room, reviewing the official reprimand from Earth Command for unauthorized system interference. His promotion prospects had evaporated. Neither spoke for a long moment. They had stabilized a reactor, fulfilled the code, and avoided immediate conflict. Yet the cost lingered in quieter ways. Fractured alliances, professional uncertainty, a civilization forced to confront its identity. Lyra met his gaze finally. Survival had not ended in applause. It had begun a reckoning neither of them could predict. Harmony Station rotated in measured silence, its orbital path steady once more around Artemis. Reactor output held at optimal levels, no longer clawing at critical thresholds. External repair drones drifted along the hull, sealing microfractures left by the surge. Inside, corridors felt quieter, conversations more cautious but purposeful. The emergency lighting had returned to neutral white, washing away the red pulse of crisis. Adrian stood beside Lyra at a panoramic viewport, watching defense platforms return to passive alignment. Data streams across both civilizations now carried collaborative proposals instead of accusations. The station had survived. The code had been honored. Yet beneath the restored stability lay something new, an awareness that strength alone had nearly shattered them. Orbit remained intact, not because tradition endured unchanged, but because two systems had fused under pressure. Survival, this time, had required evolution. The High Council convened once more, this time without raised shields or layered shouting. Lyra stood before them in formal attire rather than armor, the cracked forearm guard displayed at her side as evidence. Not decoration. Data from the reactor surge and hybrid maze stabilization projected above the chamber. Clear proof that integration had prevented catastrophe. After hours of closed deliberation, the Council announced a revision to the Royal Code. Future trials would no longer test dominance alone, but cooperative synthesis between contenders and external partners. Strength would remain honored, yet adaptability would become equal measure. The right had not been abolished, it had evolved. Some elders abstained from endorsement, but none openly defied the amendment. Across the station, the announcement transmitted in steady tones. Tradition had shifted without civil fracture. Survival had rewritten its own rulebook. Night cycle settled over Harmony Station, dimming the corridor lights to a soft glow. Adrian and Lyra stood side by side before the vast viewport, Artemis filling the darkness with oceanic blue and storm-lit silver. No alarms sounded now. No reactors screamed. Only the steady hum of life support and distant thrusters adjusting orbit. Adrian flexed his wrist where the console port had burned his skin days earlier. Lyra traced the faint crack in her repaired armor plate. Scars. Both of them. Below. Lightning rippled across Artemis's horizon. Beautiful and lethal in equal measure. They had survived the arena, the sabotage, the politics. Yet survival had not preserved what was. It had altered it. Lyra slipped her hand into his, not as symbol, not as ritual, but as choice. Outside the glass, a meteor burned briefly and vanished. Evolution never arrived quietly. In the end, survival was not decided by strength alone, but by the courage to evolve. Adrian and Lyra did not just stabilize a reactor, they redefined what it meant to endure. Their choice carried risk, sacrifice, and consequence. Yet it forged a bridge between worlds. Some traditions break civilizations, others transform them. If this story moved you, follow the channel and join us for the next journey into the unknown. The universe is vast, and we are just beginning.